we go. So hello, thank you so much for having me here today. Just a little introduction about me. My name is Lisa Talia-Moratti, and I'm a digital sociologist working in the technology industry. If you're scratching your head at this point and thinking, you're a what? It's totally fine. I get that reaction from most people. If you've never heard of a digital sociologist before, that's totally normal. There's two reasons for this. Firstly, we're really quite rare. So if you look up on LinkedIn, there's only 15 people in the world with a master's in digital sociology. And secondly, a lot of what we do actually happens mostly behind the scenes. So my cohort and I, the 16 digital sociologists around the world, we are scattered mostly across technology, academia, and finance. But I also, as part of this role, my digital sociological life sort of maps out into these three areas. So I currently hold the title of Head of User Research at Methods. Methods is a consultancy based here in the UK with our headquarters in London. We work with the UK government on the digital transformation of public services. I'm also an associate lecturer at Goldsmiths College and at Cardiff University, and a visiting teacher and lecturer at Plymouth University and Souk-Dupoup in Paris. And I also conduct quite a lot of independent research, as well as some research with Goldsmiths too. So what am I going to talk to you about today? Well, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I do and my approach. Being a social scientist amongst many data and computer scientists, I approach things differently because I'm trained to see the world differently. I see this as a great strength because it allows me to produce different knowledge and to produce knowledge differently. And it's this perspective of technology that I would like to talk to you about today. Technology and the digital is much more than what we can just simply easily see. When you start to see beyond the computers and the code, the social networks and the apps, you start to see all that usually lies unnoticed. As a digital sociologist, I'm really interested in coming to know and understand new ways of knowing society by studying what emerges at the interface of computing, media, social research, and social life. But more than just inspiring new ways to come to learn and understand society, the digital also forces us to really question all that we thought to be new, all that we thought to be true about the world. So it forces us to really question these fundamental aspects of social life and human life that we thought were once governed by universal and eternal truths. But it also makes us think about a little bit more about how these different things are emerging. So for instance, we think about questions relating to trust and belonging, or we think about how we can negotiate the relationship between our private and our personal selves. The reason for re-engaging with these fundamental sociological questions is because the digital has the capacity to really throw into question all that we thought to be true. And it is also shown to throw into crisis that all that we thought that was really true about the world. Digital also has the ability to reconfigure society and reconfigure social relationships. And this is why we should be studying it in this different way. So I'd like to ask you a question. How many of you, just by a show of hands, had parents who told you not to get into the car of a stranger? How many of you have taken an Uber? Okay, so the digital in this way, as we can see, has reconfigured social life and has reconfigured some of the things that we think to be true about the world. So that's what I'm interested in, and that's what I do. And so today I'm going to share with you how thinking like a digital sociologist can help us design more humane technology and more humane technical systems, and also help us reconsider and think about questions, as well as critique, discuss, and explore different ways on how we can think about technology and data. So the very first thing, I seem to be missing a slide. Never mind, here we go. So the very first thing is to redefine the word technology. Sociologists sociologists study society as a social system, and I'd like to kind of extend this idea to the technology industry as a whole. So too many technologists, I believe, like to think of technology as being a product. Many of us fall prey to this kind of thinking. We think that tech is a phone or a laptop, an app or a social network. But actually, technology is not a product. Technology is a system. And this system of technology is invisibly embedded in the world around us. Because it is a system, it is not siloed, but rather it is networked in nature. And so the technology system, as a result, is connected to other social systems in society. Systems like money and power, gender, sex, race, knowledge, and information. Technology's greater impact on the many systems in which we live our lives shows up time and time again. It shows up in computer programs and algorithms that decide how long somebody has to go to prison for, or who gets parole and who doesn't. It shows up in who gets the job and who doesn't. And it shows up in who is acknowledged for who they are and who isn't. Something similar, but not as sinister, happened to my friend and I, Natalie, when a facial recognition technology kept telling my friend Natalie that photographs of her were actually photographs of me. It was really quite creepy. The system of tech is networked with other social systems in which we live our lives. And this is one of the reasons why I believe it is so important for us to redefine technology from being a product to being a system. Because when we do this, it provides us with multiple perspectives from which we can explore, critique, and discuss the many challenges as well as solutions that the industry faces. Secondly, sociology looks at the study of social behavior of groups instead of zeroing in and focusing only on individuals. And I think this is the next important thing that we need to do in the technology industry, is that we need to shift our focus from focusing on individuals to communities and the wider environment. In an effort to personalize and tailor technology experiences to best suit us, to best suit all of you, technologists have actually become quite disconnected from humanity as a whole. So in the tech industry, there is a relentless focus on what we just heard, the end user. And we have this focus that started out actually with really good intentions, because technologists actually wanted to create empathetic technology. But in many cases, this has actually had the opposite impact. Firstly, by calling people users instead of just people or customers or colleagues or citizens, we actually start to dehumanize the very people we're trying to establish empathy with. Secondly, by building an entire strategy, or by giving certain people exactly what they want, places sort of blinkers on our eyes and stops us from imagining and considering and planning for unintended consequences. What really might happen when a seemingly small change to a technology product has an enormous social impact. A really good example of this happened about 3 years ago and impacted millions of people around the world. So according to reports, Facebook fired 26 contracted editorial staff from their trending news team and replaced them with a team of engineers and an algorithm. It could well be coincidental, because I also don't want Facebook to sue me. But it's worth noting that 3 days after firing their human editors, fake news trended on Facebook. I'm not going to go into fake news because we all know how that fake news story unfolds. The next thing, sociologists are really interested in studying the beliefs and ideas that help people make sense of the world around them. And these beliefs and ideas manifest in certain types of behaviors, which is why it is so important to understand the beliefs and ideas that drive people, because this is manifesting in the behavior. And there is a particular type of belief in the technology industry that is really manifesting some really negative behaviors and problematic behaviors. So we tell people not to speed on the roads when they're driving in a car or a motorbike or anything, because speed kills. But in the technology industry, we tell people that they need to move as fast as they can, to move fast and break things, and to learn the art of building massively valuable companies in a lightning-fast way, So they call this blitz scaling. In the technology industry, we are blasted from every angle that in order to succeed, we need to keep moving faster. But when we are moving this fast, it's really difficult to do things in a really robust manner. I've seen firsthand where, working in startups, especially when there's no money or time to spare, how research is the very first thing to go. And so despite trying to be user-centric, we're not spending any time trying to understand the people and embed ourselves in the systems in which these people are living their lives. So I've had to walk away from many projects in my life where I have had to walk away from working with startups because they've told me they've built entire products doing absolutely no customer research whatsoever. Or the countless times that I've had to work with clients and where they've continued to cut my research budget in half and then half again and then half again. And then all you're left with is you're having to resort to just buying a few generic research reports online. And that is not actually doing user research or customer experience research. So often when research is done and there is budget to assign to research, we're not really doing our research any good justice. Because when it is done, it's done as cheaply as possible, using methods that actually remove the individual from the context of their life and the context of the system that they find themselves in. So what do I mean by this? Well, I mean that many researchers just land up doing interviews, either over the phone or in an office environment. Or many researchers who are working in the technology industry are having to work with engineering teams that force them to do these lots of A/B tests, where we're often finding out where the highest conversion rate wins, whether that's over a certain kind of image or text or color palette, etc. And the problem with this is that we don't know why people are choosing one of these things over the other. So it's again the removing of the context. I feel it's really important to discuss these three key dimensions. So seeing tech as a product, designing for the user, and believing that speed is the route to success. Because together they have actually shaped what the technology industry has been given rise to today and what it has become today. In addition, I bring up these three dimensions because they are noticeable and notable on how they push up against, very uncomfortably so, about current questions and current conversations that we are trying to have about ethics. Our agile ways of working in 2-week sprints feel very awkward and quite messy when we try to get them into the world of ethics. Our desire to want to digitize everything but not have the time, nor the money, nor the energy to want to actually measure the impact of our work is somehow very ironic that has found itself at the heart of every mission-driven technology organization. We have to accept that there is no such thing as an ethics drive-through. And we have to accept that we have to shift gears if we want our ethics and governance frameworks to work inside our organizations. Over the decades, technology has become ever more entrenched in science and engineering. It is called computer science and software engineering after all. But today, technology is weaved in everywhere, and our relationship with it is changing very quickly. We're quickly moving from a relationship with technology that is based on inputs and outputs to one where humans are interacting with machines on a far more deeper, more personal level. So the app that helped you find love, that time that you applied for your dream job while sitting on your desk, the wearable technology that helps you manage your health or your insomnia. We're even seeing huge success in people using chatbots to help treat those who suffer from mental health, anxiety and depression, even suicidal thoughts. This technology that I'm talking about really goes by a bigger name, a bigger umbrella term, and that is artificial intelligence. And it extends far beyond the world of science. Because in the world of today, technology is as much about code as it actually is about human life. And this is why I feel that there are many people who have every right to participate in these conversations, not just those with a technical or science background. So some of you might be thinking, wait, what about data? surely there is no way that you could take these sociological soft things and apply them to something as technical or objective or as neutral as data. Well, actually, I disagree. So I think if we take the 30,000-foot view, you quickly start to see that change isn't really going to happen by making data only more transparent. And change isn't going to happen only by having better ways to explain how algorithms work. And change is certainly not going to happen by getting everyone learning how to code. We really need to let go of that particular obsession. It's only actually once we take this much broader view that we can really appreciate just how much technology and data influences our lives and how to really position ourselves in such a way in order to change it for the better. Stefan Verhulst, who is the co-founder and chief research and development officer at the GovLab at NYU, I recently had a conversation with him, and he has this brilliant saying where he talks about data is not an object, but it's a process. And I thought that's really fantastic to share with you today. And this process is located within a social system. So in order to really bring about change, I believe that we need to actually get our heads out of a spreadsheet and into a wider social system. We need to talk far more about how data is collected, processed, managed, accessed, and protected within the larger system that we find ourselves in. Issues of bias are not going to be fixed, not ever, by simply neutralizing them. Bias is not a bug within the code. It's actually a design feature within the human. And so in order to change it, what we need to really do is not only have the power to code differently, but we also need to process differently. People are really obsessed with talking about transparency in data and transparency in algorithms, and I think this is important, but I'm becoming increasingly more obsessed with talking about the transparency that we need to have in the decision-making on how data came to be. So where do we go from here? Well, the first thing to acknowledge is that if we do not give more people more accessible ways to talk about technology and to engage in debates about technology, our efforts to democratize life-changing technology like AI are going to continue to feel like a struggle. The diversity challenge in the technology industry goes beyond race and gender. It also includes skill sets and intellectual talents. We need far more diverse voices in the room when we are having conversations about technology and data. We need more people from non-technical backgrounds, non-data backgrounds, to feel confident enough to be able to participate in these conversations. From my experience, talking about technology in these more sociological ways has allowed many more people to feel confident to participate in conversations that they once believed to be far more technical in nature. Because suddenly what they find is they have the language and ideas to be able to participate. I would like to really encourage you as IT professionals to think and reflect on your own behavior, to think about the ways that you can engage with your non-technical colleagues, and to reflect on the language and ideas that you are using and how you can actually include them into the conversations that you're having about technology and data within your organizations. I thought I would, in closing, share with you some of the extra things that I'm thinking about at the moment and sort of start to open up and democratize the conversation about some of the challenges I see that we're lying ahead. So the very first thing is about a new kind of collaboration. So we have lots of questions about, can technology truly be creative? Can technology truly be intelligent? Some of the things I'm thinking about is, can technology truly be collaborative? Right now, a lot of our technology is based on sort of commands. So just saying, hey Siri, or I hope I don't activate anyone's phone, hey Siri or hey Alexa, and having something to talk back to us. But how do we actually build greater reciprocity into the systems and into the technology that we are building and designing? So I'm really thinking a lot about this, and something that I found really inspiring was this question that was posed by Anna Ridler, who's a computational artist. And she talks about, like, what is creativity? Is it in the output or is it found in the process? She talks about the idea of writing being both a verb as well as a noun. And where does the creativity lie? Is it within the human? Where does the intelligence lie? Is it within the human? Is it within the machine? Or is it in the space in between? And I think increasingly we need to think about the space in between, the place, the relationship between people and the technology, and what that collaborative effort really looks like, and how do we design that better. There are lots of really interesting spaces where you can read a little bit more about this. Or go look into this more. The Barbican in London is having a really fantastic exhibition on at the moment called More Than Human. There's a really good podcast called Sleepwalkers, and in episode 2 they talk a lot about this reciprocity, this collaborative nature and collaborative effort between human and machine. And there's a brand new tech that is in beta phase but is soon to be launched out of NYU, and it's called Runway AI. And what it does is it's a kind of Photoshop for non-technical people who can start to use these different types of algorithms and code to overlay over their creative outputs. So they can overlay facial recognition over images that they have drawn or created. And so this is a really interesting way on trying to get non-technical people engaged with the technical and engaging with AI in a way that feels really comfortable to them. The second thing I'm thinking a lot about is skills degradation. So human jobs will change, but they definitely are not going to be disappearing overnight. In fact, if you look at the research, robots have been threatening to take human jobs for about 150 years now. And we're all still working, so that's great. So I think we need to think about the more nuanced ways in which we have conversations about skills and jobs. What I am thinking a lot about is how skills are actually becoming degraded over time because they are simply not acknowledged. So there's a real paradox with AI at the moment. So there are human hands all over AI. However, we're not really acknowledging the human hands, this unseen human-computer workforce. And the work that is really being done by Mary Gray and Siddharth Suri in the latest work that she's written called Ghost Work is really important, because just because we don't see these tasks happening doesn't mean that they are not there. And many of my students who I teach at Goldsmiths and Cardiff will start to be engaging in the workplace with these new kinds of skills that are required in order to get AI to work. The labeling of data, the processing of data, the categorizing of data, the tagging of data. So if we look at some of the recent research that's come out, 2/5, so around 40% of Europe's artificial intelligence startups do not actually use any AI at all, which is just crazy, really. So for people who are entering technology and the technology workforce within these human-computer roles, we need to be really mindful that we acknowledge their work as valuable and that we actually pay people fairly and name them as contributors in the work that we do. So I'm sure you've seen or heard that I'm really passionate about bringing many more people into the conversation about technology, and this is something that I feel really fired up about, is trying to how do we democratize the conversation further. I think we need to move from thinking about STEM to STEAM, and we need to think about the role and the importance of the arts and the humanities in furthering the technology industry forward. There's this really lovely theory in sustainability and ecology where it's called edge theory. And edge theory looks at the wildlife and the ecology that is able to develop when two opposing ecosystems meet. So when the sand meets the sea, land meets sea, or where desert meets a rainforest, and the kind of wildlife that is able to emerge at those two spaces. I think that this is a really lovely metaphor to think about different skill sets and how when we actually bring these two things together, the new kind of creative ideas that can emerge at what seems at first to be two opposing sectors or industries or ideas. Of course, multidisciplinary teams are very important, and we're seeing more and more teams become more multidisciplinary. But what is perhaps more interesting for me at this point is looking at the rise of multidisciplinary individuals and how we actually need more of these people. So we're seeing a whole new range of job titles occur. So we're seeing digital anthropologists, digital sociologists, data philosophers, feminist AI researchers, computational artists. These are often all the people that I hang out with. I'm very lucky. But I'm starting to see that more and more in industry and in organizations, what we need more of is what I've been trying to call like bridge people, for just lack of a better word. People that are able to bridge the gap between two different industries or two different sectors or two different ideas. And we're going to need more and more of these people, because what is happening is that over the last few decades, as science has become ever more, as technology has become ever more entrenched in science and data and engineering, what we found is that it's become very difficult for people who are not brought up in that space and do not have the right language or ideas to contribute in that space. So if you have these multidisciplinary individuals who understand different kinds of language, different kinds of ideas, they're able to really translate that to their wider teams and therefore democratize that conversation even more. Lastly, I'm thinking a lot about ownership. So with the rise of multidisciplinary teams and with lots of different people working together on these big systems, how do we think about questions of ownership? Who owns what? So some latest research that was published by Bloomberg showed that for the first time in 20 years, I think, Google now employs more freelancers than it does permanent employees. And those freelancers are not given the same rights and are not acknowledged in the same way as the permanent employees of Google. But they are still very valuable and contribute enormously to what Google is producing every day. So this is the same thing when we are working with multiple people across the organization and people from different skill sets, and we think about this unnamed human-computer workforce. Who owns the final product? Where does ownership lie? How do we name our contributors? Something that's been quite interesting is how they've been able to do this in the music industry. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I think looking at what Imogen Heap is doing in the music industry with the creative passports and using blockchain technology and open data initiatives, they allow for many of these music makers to be able to create a digital identity and be part of a searchable data and profile database. So I think this is something, an idea that we might have to bring into multiple creative industries to help with this ownership problem. So I realize that I've shared a lot with you today, and I'm going to spend some time answering questions if there are any. But I thought just to summarize, just these few things, these 5 things. So firstly, think in systems. Remember that things are always interconnected. Secondly, just don't think about individuals in isolation, because individuals never exist in isolation. We are social beings. And so as a result, think about the context in which humans are living their lives. Think about the communities. Think about the wider environment in which people live. And also think about what might happen if individual behavior changes en masse. Remember that beliefs drive behavior. So in order to understand behavior, you first need to actually understand what people believe. Data is not an object, but rather it's a process. And so conversations about data need to include conversations about its provenance, how it was processed, what it gets used for, and who gets to access that data. And lastly, when it comes to transparency, the most valuable kind of transparency that I believe that we can advocate for is actually transparency in the decisions that drive our businesses and our design processes. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. We were having a debate just last night about the term users that
great.
you brought up, and how we sort of hate it, but it's really ingrained in our industry. Mm-hmm. What would your preferred term be, and why?
It really depends on the organization. So working in the public sector, I just like to, how are people going to be using this? Or, who are the communities of practice who are going to be using this product? If I'm in my capacity as a lecturer, I talk about students and I talk about my colleagues. So I really try to use the language that is right for the context and right for the organization. I think users is only appropriate in any kind of drug setting. So I try to avoid it at all costs. I think it's quite interesting how the term users is this 1980s hangover to describe people who abuse and use drugs and alcohol in excess and to a point where it's a problem. And we have somehow adopted this term, and now we're really worried that we've created addictive technology. It's a bit like, well, what were you expecting? You used a very term that is used comes straight out of the narrative of addiction. So, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi.
First of all, thank you for coming to this. I think it's such an interesting aspect that we don't ever really get to think about when we talk about what we do here in this group, which is just supporting users, as we say, in that sense. I think one of the key points you pointed out to me, and I think everyone else here, is probably point number 4 about how we often think we don't have a voice when we talk to other people, perhaps in IT, third line. We still have a voice and we can still participate in all those conversations about the process behind what we do. I think that's a really, really important takeaway from me in that sense. I had a chance to read your research paper not long ago, where you talked about, again, we talked about users and user experience. And is there anything you want to add onto the group about that? Because I think that's a really interesting context. We often think about the user experience, and it's kind of drummed into us, again, user and experience, that sort of thing, that we have to think about the journey our customers undertake, and we design for the user experience, which, in my view, it's a point in time. It constantly changes what the user or what the community sees. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add there.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I did a little bit of work with Adobe, actually, looking at how the industry has to reimagine or consider new dimensions when it comes to designing experiences using emerging technology. And this is specifically for emerging technology, but I think it really touches on what you're talking about because of this industry has changed so much. And one of the first things we found is that it has to start with empathy. If you're trying to design an experience, a user experience for someone, you have to start in a place of empathy. You have to understand how people are living their lives and how technology contributes to that or detracts from that or frustrates them. You have to understand what their desires are, what their ultimate wish list is, and then where their pain points lie. You cannot design an experience without getting to know the people and understanding the actual context in which the tech is going to live and be used. And I think that is the very kind of cornerstone around being really successful in this space. Another thing to think about is about adaptability, and to think that just because you've done this piece of empathetic research work up front, that okay, now we're done, right? Now we never have to do that again. You have to think that people's needs change all the time, right? So there needs to be a constant line throughout your work that is adaptable, that allows you to be able to take the experience that you've done and constantly iterate and improve on it. We often talk about iterating apps or tech products, but we don't really think about iterating the experience, the total experience for someone. And so we need to think about those two things in conjunction with one another. And that kind of touches on just again what I mentioned earlier about reciprocity. So really thinking about not just about how is somebody actually going to use this thing, but actually how does this become a collaborative agent in someone's life? How does this thing allow someone to become more creative? allow someone to become more intelligent, allow someone to communicate their ideas, allow someone to even to become their best self if we're really trying to be lofty about our ideals. But really trying to see this as not a tool, but part of the system in which somebody lives their lives, and the kind of reciprocity and reciprocal nature of that relationship that we need to have. Some of the things that I talk a lot about with the researchers I work with is, very often we just think, oh, how does somebody use their phone? What if we changed this and we thought, okay, what if this becomes somebody's best friend? What if we took the relationship of the idea of the best friend, and how does somebody interact with their best friend on a day-to-day basis? What is the collaborative nature that somebody has with their best friend? How do we build some of the elements of that personality or of that experience into the products and devices that we're having? And that might change. So if you're designing, a chatbot that is looking to encourage people to talk about their feelings, we want to take the relationship that people have with a therapist or people have with an older sister or an older brother. How do people talk to that older sister, older brother, that therapist about their some of the things that they're experiencing? And how do you take then the relationships and some of the instances from that relationship and build it into the experience that you're creating? So really looking further afield in social life for inspiration on how we design tech relationships. Thank you. Yes, question at the back.
Hi, I was sort of thinking about the internet sort of 20 years ago when I first started using it. It felt like a very democratic place. There was a sense of anyone can set up a website and anyone can. There was things like web rings where people were kind of linking and forming little communities. And these days it seems like the sort of the power has all shifted to a very small number of places like Google and Facebook, who have now sort of designed software that's designed to be addictive and that is kind of just about trying to get people to cling on for another few seconds and another swipe. And I wondered if you see that as being a sort of temporary shift and that it'll swing back the other way, or where you see that going.
We're going to need government to step in and break it up. Facebook are not going to break themselves up voluntarily. They don't see any point in breaking it up. They're stronger together with their different companies together. So, Instagram is doing things for Facebook, and Facebook is doing things for WhatsApp, and, it all is working together as a big machine. And if we don't have somebody like the government step in with regulation, I don't think it's going to break up. But yes, I completely agree with you. The tech space has become increasingly homogenized, really, by what they call FANG. And, unless we start to allow smaller startups to come up and provide different services and have access to the same amounts of data and the same amount of talents, it's going to be very difficult to get them to lose their foothold that they've created. And because if you're a software engineer or a data scientist, why would you work for a tiny startup early on in your career if you've got student loans to pay, and you want to be able to rise up and get access to lots of data, and you want to be able to work in a bigger organization, and you're going to want to go to those places. So it's a really tricky situation. I think unless government steps in, I fear that it won't change anytime soon.
It's quite hard to imagine that happening, given that these companies exist internationally. They evade every government. They live everywhere and nowhere, and particularly the governments in places like America and Britain just seem to become more neoliberal. They're not actually. They don't particularly want to sink their teeth into these companies, and it's.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd love to see what you're talking about happen, but it's hard to imagine at the moment.
Yeah, it's one of those things where these big tech companies have developed their own mini worlds. And, there's a really great metaphor that Kara Swisher uses, the tech journalist, where she says, Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, they've created these worlds, but they didn't design traffic lights, and they didn't design roundabouts, and they didn't design how to take out the trash. And, that is some of the problems that we're now seeing, is that they've created these enormous systems that are kind of like mini worlds, but they haven't thought about the consequences. And I struggle even now working with the government to see how they are going to start dismantling this. And one of the problems is that there is a bit of a tech literacy gap in the government at the moment, and there's just the understanding is quite low. And there was no more was this apparent than at the Facebook hearings last year, when that time that Mark Zuckerberg had to sit in front of the senators. It was embarrassing. I mean, they just wasted hours because asking stupid questions like, how do you make your money? It was, crazy.
So just to go on that point, all these big tech companies have our data and have all of this stuff, and they have all the data on the government. So there's no way the government can step in and do anything about it, because data is the key, really, and having that data and all that dirt on people, I just think that, the government can't do anything about it.
I think this is one of the reasons why we need to think about data as being not just a product but a process, and because it allows many more people to engage in the conversations about data and start to put some pressure on these organizations. So I think while there has to be some kind of dismantling from the top, from governments to dismantle these things, the more people we can get educated and the more we can fill the literacy gap, the more we can also have the upward pressure and start to really change things from the bottom up, in the same way the sustainability movement has done that, in the same way the whole anti-plastic movement has started to do that. So pressure needs to come from both sides in order for the big system to change. Any more questions? Okay, thank you so much. I'll be around for the rest of the day. Thank you for your time.